Twilight, twi bright, first twi, I see tonight. That is the dumbest joke I've ever made. Twilight is one of the most polarizing works of literature of all time. It's got a lot of fans, but a lot of haters as well. And that makes sense. I mean, anything that reaches the height that Twilight did, there has to be something appealing about it, or it never would have gotten that famous. And once things get that famous, haters come out of the woodwork, right? A lot of the criticism of Twilight is simply boiled down to it's for 12-year-old girls and so it's dumb. It's a little bit of a problem we have in our society where we consider anything that women like to be stupid, and we also consider anything kids like to be stupid, and so young women have essentially the worst combination of that, right? To the point where people use, isn't that for 12-year-old girls, as a reason to say that something's stupid. Like, that's the only justification you need. If you can say it's for 12-year-old girls, then it is dumb. But that's not to say that there isn't valid criticism of Twilight. It's not a perfect novel by any means. I'm on this journey right now to reread a lot of my favorite books from when I was a kid. I was a huge fan of Twilight when I was a kid. And so I thought it would be fun to reread it and do like a literary analysis on it. What are the pros? What are the cons? What's the deal with Twilight? Is it a good book? Objectively speaking, is it well written? And I put together a whole little costume for it. Isn't this fun? I kind of want to start doing costumes for more of my videos, so I'm dressed a little vampiric today. I love this little like sleeve thing. But yeah, I'm going to be talking mostly about the Twilight book, but luckily my dear friend Marissa from The Review Crew, her and her husband Nathan do movie reviews. I will link it in the description. It's very good. I highly recommend you go check it out. And she was so kind as to come over and do an interview with me about the actual Twilight movie. I think I'm going to put that at the end of the video, but if you're most interested in the movie, then definitely skip ahead because I'm putting chapters in. And with that, let's get started. So as I've mentioned at least once a video at this point, literary analysis is looking at what the author was trying to do and then judging whether or not they were successful. So let's talk about what Stephanie Meyer was trying to do. Well, the good thing is I've got the illustrated guide right here where she does a whole interview about like her motivations and stuff. I've read a lot of it. I will admit I haven't made it all the way through this whole thing yet. It's more of like an encyclopedia than it is like a novel. She thought of it in a dream and then she wrote the entire book in about 3 months. The dream she had was specifically about the meadow scene. She had a dream about the meadow scene and she just became obsessed with the two characters in it. She wanted to know what was going on with them. She wanted to know like what the guy was and what brought them together and all of that. And so a lot of her motivation for actually writing the book was just answering those questions for herself. She was curious about these characters and so she wanted to know what they were up to. I honestly think that a lot of times that is the best way to come at a piece of work, to have a question yourself that you're answering. But it doesn't seem that she went into it with any one specific message in mind. So when we talked about, Hunger Games, we talked about how Suzanne Collins really wanted to talk about like just war, and how similarly in Les Mis, Victor Hugo also wanted to talk about just war. Twilight's not about just war. It's not really about anything specific, or so it seems. She just was curious about these characters and she wanted to write the love story between them, mostly for herself to find out. And then it was her sister who really pushed her to pursue publishing it, and here we are. Some might see this as a knock to the book, right? It doesn't have any kind of like deeper message, I guess you could say. I'm not one of those people, okay? I don't think everything needs to have a deeper message. I'm sorry. Not everything needs to be high art all the time, okay? Sometimes things can just be stupid and fun, and that's all they are, and that's valid too. And so to me, it's not like a knock on Twilight that she didn't have any kind of deeper message she wanted to send. It's more just a fact that we're going into the reading of the book remembering. That sentence didn't make any sense. It's a fact. My God, get it together, Meredith. You've got a lot of filming to do. This is a long script. It is a fact that we are just going to take into account in our analysis. Got it? Good. The last thing that I really, really want to stress before we dive in is the genre. This is considered a young adult romance, and so it's targeted at girls between the ages of 12 and 18. So I will be judging it as a work of fiction that was meant for girls between the ages of 12 and 18. Meaning, it being a vampire romance and that's stupid is not a valid piece of criticism. That is not valid here. So if you want to get in the comment section and just comment something silly, oh, vampire romance is stupid, it's stupid, Twilight's just stupid. I mean, you can. I'm not going to stop you. I'm not going to delete the comment. But I am judging you, and your opinion is wrong. All right, let's talk about the themes. Themes? Meredith, you just said there was no deeper message. No. Well, Okay, yes, I did. But I more meant that she didn't go into it thinking to herself, like, this is the message I want to send, right? She didn't have some, like, specific thing she wanted to get across. But that doesn't mean that there aren't themes. In fact, I was surprised by how prevalent the themes were. I will admit that the way that Twilight is talked about has kind of infected my brain. And I was thinking to myself, oh, you know, I'm going to probably enjoy it on the reread because of nostalgia, but I'm sure there isn't going to be a whole lot to analyze. And so I'm just going to have to dive into the plot a lot. Boy, was I wrong. And Stephanie Meyer, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I let the world brainwash me into thinking there was nothing more to this book than just these two teenagers falling in love and one of them being a vampire. There is a lot to unpack here, and we are going to unpack it for probably over an hour. So buckle up, grab a snack, let's dive into the themes. Or themes singular, at least in this first book. And that's temptation. The book actually opens, I have the white copy here. I got the white copies for this video, and it opens with a Genesis quote. So the quote is, "But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, thou shalt not eat it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die." Genesis 2:17. I love the use of the word eatest. I'm working that into my vocabulary somehow. When I saw that at the beginning of this book, I was convinced that the original Prince of Twilight did not have this because I have zero memory of this. So I actually dug out another copy of it that I have that's sitting over there, so I can't show it to you. But it's an earlier print of the original cover, which is the black cover, right? And it also has the Genesis quote. And so I think it was in the original publishing of this. I suppose I could have Googled that, but I'm not that good a YouTuber. All right, so I clocked that right away. I opened it and I saw the Genesis quote and I thought, well, okay, that's going to be important. It also made me realize why it has the apple on the cover. I've actually never thought about that before. So maybe this is super obvious to a bunch of people who have already read the book, and I'm going to look like an idiot for not remembering this from when I was like 12. Genuinely, like, it was upon this reread that I realized that temptation and like references to Genesis were so much of the underlying theme of this book. And once I realized that, I was like, are you serious? Women is temptation? Oh, like, I really didn't want to have to make a video like ragging on Twilight. I love Twilight. Like, I wanted to make a video saying Twilight isn't as bad as you think it is, and she had to go with women as temptation. I'm not going to tell you what to think, okay? I'm just going to present to you like where I noticed that within the book and let you make your own decisions. Because to me, I think there are ways that we can take these common tropes that have been so damaging and twist them in a way that is maybe beneficial. And I think that that is what Stephanie Meyer was trying to do. And I don't think that's me just doing gymnastics to not rag on a book that I love from my childhood. In order to do that, we have to talk like a little bit about Genesis. I'm so sorry. I'm sure you did not click into this video thinking you were going to get a Bible lesson. It is the following day. I was editing this video last night and I was watching the footage back of me talking about this part specifically. And I just forgot to say so much. I got off on kind of a roll there and I wasn't looking at my bullet points. And there was enough that I forgot to say that it would have been a ridiculously long voiceover. I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna redo it. So I do apologize for the bit of a step down in outfit, but I digress. I guess I do actually still have the crown sitting right here. Should we put this back on? Genesis. Before we dive into talking about anything religious, I want to give a little bit of a disclaimer here. This is going to be very similar to when we were talking about Les Mis. When we are analyzing media, you don't just have to take into account what the author was trying to do, but also what their beliefs are and what they might have been pulling from for some of the messages in their books. So this is in no way, shape, or form me trying to tell you what to believe. I'm not telling you that any of this is fact, nor am I even really telling you what I believe. I'm coming at this from an angle of what does Stephanie Meyer believe, how that translates into the book, and where I think the references are coming from within the book. So it's very analytical in nature. I'm not at all trying to give an opinion about any of this, other than to just say I think this is what Stephanie Meyer was trying to do. Stephanie Meyer is Mormon. So it didn't surprise me to find that there were some religious undertones here, but I will admit that it surprised me to find out that she was citing Genesis so much. So in order to talk about what I think Stephanie Meyer was referencing and whether or not this is positive impact on young girls, we have to talk a little bit about Genesis and different interpretations of Genesis. So Genesis is the first section in the Bible, and it's the origin story in the Judeo-Christian faith. So it's meant to tell the story of how the earth came to be and how humans came to be in the situation we're in. Starts with the let there be light creation of the earth and the water and all of that stuff, right? And then moves into the Garden of Eden. Now, the Garden of Eden is this paradise. No pain, no suffering, everybody has a great life. And God says to the humans, you can do anything you want, you can eat anything you want, everything is here for your enjoyment, except for the apples on this one tree. And that's the quote that Stephanie Meyer actually uses at the beginning of the book. So it's obviously important to our analysis here, where God is saying to them, everything else is available to you, but if you eat the fruit off this one tree, you will die. Do not eat the fruit. Look at me. Don't eat the fruit. And Adam and Eve are like, cool. We trust you. Okay. We're not going to eat the fruit. Don't worry about it. Then the snake comes about and he starts to coerce Eve into eating the apple. And eventually he succeeds and Eve eats the apple. And she then turns around and does that same coercion to Adam. You don't know what you're missing. Like, God doesn't know anything. Why would he tell us not to eat this? This knowledge of good and evil is awesome. And like all that kind of stuff, right? And Adam eats the apple as well. The funniest part of the story to me is that then God like comes around the corner and Adam and Eve are hiding. And he's like, why are you guys hiding? And they're like, because we're naked. And God's like, who told you that you're naked? Why do you know that you're naked? That's crazy. They were like, and that's how God found out that they ate the apples. So he kicks them out of the Garden of Eden and he places a curse, if you will, off of both Eve and Adam. So Eve is cursed to always have really painful childbirths and Adam is cursed to always work the earth in order to survive. Okay. So that's Genesis. That's just the base like plot that happens. When I first found out that we were talking about like Genesis and temptation here, I was very frustrated. I'm not gonna lie. I was like, oh, women is temptation. Like we're doing this, really, Stephanie Meyer? And you know, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I jumped to that conclusion right away because I was watching through the whole book for her to really pull out some of the more problematic interpretations of Genesis talking about women as temptation, and she never did. And that's where I'm saying I think we can take these tropes that have been used to do so much damage in the past and turn them on their head to show a different perspective. And I genuinely believe, having read it, that that's what Stephanie Meyer was trying to do. But again, I'm not telling you what to believe. I'm just going to present to you the information and you make your own choice, right? One interpretation of Genesis, I guess is how I'll word it, is that women work for the devil. Women work for the devil and we're inherently temptation and that we're always doing something wrong because we just in and of ourselves tempt men. And so any ill actions that men take towards women is ultimately women's fault because we tempted them into doing it. I don't think I need to tell you how wholeheartedly I disagree with this concept in general, but a lot of people who believe this very misogynistic idea use Genesis as a bit of a reference for that and talk about how Eve was the one to tempt Adam to eat the apple. Now, again, I'm criticizing this interpretation of Genesis because it's been so damaging to women over the centuries. It's really ingrained in our society to believe that women are inherently a temptation to men. And a lot of times, even still to this day, men's actions are justified through the lens of that temptation. You tempted him, so you had a role in this as well. You have some guilt in it. Can you really blame him? You tempted him. Basically, our whole victim blaming culture comes from this idea that women are an inherent temptation to men. So it's fair criticism, right? I think that's a damaging interpretation of Genesis. And if I'm telling you to believe anything across this entire video, it is to believe that that is not true. And women are not inherently responsible for men's actions just by via of existing. I can't believe I have to say that, but apparently I do. So then a lot of people would turn around and say, well, okay, that's the problem with Genesis, is that it's saying that. Except it's not really. That's a very literal interpretation of Genesis. Now, I was raised Catholic, so this is what I was taught in Sunday school when I was a kid as to at least how the Catholics interpret Genesis. It's not gendered in nature. It's not meant to show how women work for the devil. Again, not telling you what to believe, just talking about what the text is supposed to represent. This story is partially supposed to show us that when you give in to the devil's temptation, you become an avenue for other people to become tempted. So again, when I first saw that Stephanie Meyer was gonna use temptation so much, like a direct reference to Genesis and temptation, and immediately putting together, we got an apple on the cover, you've got Bella who's got this blood that smells really good to Edward, and Edward is tempted to eat her, but he doesn't want to, and all of that like added up in my brain to be like, no, I'm gonna have to make a video like flaming this, because to me it's like I don't remember this at all. I don't remember any references to Genesis when I read this as a kid. Like going back to it now, I was like, oh no, like I did not think I was going to end up making a video being like Twilight is unbelievably problematic beyond what I had already known about regarding stuff we'll talk about later in the video with like the representation of Jacob and also Edward's behavior and stuff, but that I was also going to have to talk about this. And I was really frustrated because I loved this book as a kid, and I will admit that the very biased part of me wanted to reread it and enjoy it as a result. But I was watching for that. I was watching for that the whole time I read, and I do not think that that is what Stephanie Meyer was trying to say. In fact, I think Stephanie Meyer agrees with the interpretation that I shared, being what I was taught when I was a kid. Ultimately, like, you are always responsible for your own actions, because there are so many places within the book Bella feels bad about tempting Edward and he immediately shuts that down. He never once allows her to like think that it's her fault. Every time she says something to him about it, whether she apologizes to him or like she moves in a way that he like smells her blood and he like moves back or whatever, and she says to him, "I'm so sorry," he always is like, "It's not your fault, it's my fault, like I'm the monster here, none of this is your fault, like I have to have the self-control to resist, it's not your fault, blah blah blah." So again, I feel like there's almost, I don't know if it was explicitly intentional on her part to be referencing like victim blaming specifically, but it could have been, right? It could have been an explicit message from Stephanie Meyer to talk about the issues with victim blaming, how it's never the victim's fault. Or it could have just been that that is her understanding of Genesis, and so maybe she wasn't trying to comment on people's misunderstandings of Genesis as much as she was just pulling from Genesis and using it in the text. It's impossible to know without hearing from Stephanie Meyer herself, like, what her purpose was in using Genesis here. But all I can say is, having read it, I do not think that Stephanie Meyer believes that women are temptation and that we're inherently doing something bad by being that temptation. And I certainly don't think that she was trying to send that message within the book. I think it's just a theme. So that's the one reference to Genesis here is, you know, Bella as the apple that Edward cannot bite from. It's a very literal reference, very literal. Bella is the apple, right? But there's more abstract connections as well. You'll remember when I was going through the story, it's the tree of knowledge, right? And when you eat an apple from the tree, you gain knowledge of good and evil. And so if you think about it from Bella's character's perspective, the vampire world is almost her tree of knowledge. And the more that she knows about the vampire world, the more she is at risk. And we see later in the series that the Volturi, who are like the vampire police almost, find out that Bella knows so much about the vampire world and immediately are like, all right, you either have to kill her or turn her into a vampire, because we cannot have a human walking around knowing so much about us. So she's either got to die or become a vampire. We see how later in the story, Bella's quest for knowledge about the vampires ends up becoming what kills her, if you will, because it ends her human life. At least in this book, those are the big references. It's not a perfect allegory, but I think that's it. I think that's what she was trying to do. On one hand, I feel like the way that Stephanie Meyer approached it is probably the least damaging way to do so, and maybe has the capacity to undo some of the damage done in so many young girls being taught that their temptation is their fault. There's always the just simple fact that if you're pulling from the Bible, you're leaving out some of your reader base, which is not in and of itself problematic as long as it's understood by the author. I don't think you can just say that making any kind of reference to religion is in and of itself problematic. I think it's which references you're making, what messages you're sending. Definitely give me your opinion. I'm curious to hear what you guys think, and I'm really open to feedback. If you feel like anything I said here was not the right way to approach this conversation, then I'm perfectly happy to hear that. I just feel like it's difficult but important when we're talking about literature and we're talking about references in literature. If there is a biblical reference, the approach to that does have to be very careful. And I understand that. And that's why if there is something in here that you feel I didn't approach in the right way, I would love to hear that. So then in the future, if the subject comes up again, I can approach it in a different way. Just really trying to make it clear that my goal is to just show what I think Stephanie Meyer was referencing and nothing else. So now I'll pass it back to me in full costume to take you through the rest of the video. With that, let's talk a little bit more about the characters. Bella. In the years since I have read this book, I have heard many a person refer to Bella as a boring, bland character. And again, I went into this reread of the book kind of expecting her to be like, well, you know, because that's how everybody talks about her. That's a lot of the defenses of Kristen Stewart's performance in the movie, is that Bella is written to be bland and boring, and so her portrayal of her is also bland and boring. I could not disagree with this more upon the reread. Bella is not a boring character. I just think she doesn't have hobbies. So people think she's a boring character because when she's by herself, she just really goes to school and comes home. She moves to Forks right at the beginning of the book from Phoenix. Shout out Phoenix. Like I said, she just doesn't really have hobbies, but I don't think that makes her a boring character, and that certainly doesn't make her one-dimensional. To me, a one-dimensional character has like one personality trait. But a two-dimensional character is also bad. And that's where a character might have a few different personality traits, but they only ever manifest in the exact same way. If a character's stubborn, they're always stubborn. Or if a character is indifferent, they're always indifferent. That is also very boring to read. And so I think thinking about your characters as a whole person and like seeing the different ways that their character traits would play out in different situations is a marker of a really good author. For starters, Bella just feels very real. Like as you're reading it, she feels like a real person. She feels like an actual person who could really exist. When you're reading her internal monologue, she exists. She exists to me. And again, I don't think this book would have reached the height that it did if the characters didn't have that. Like Edward and Jacob and Bella, whether or not you think they're well written or whether or not you think all of the choices that were made related to them were good choices, they feel like real people. They feel like people who could actually exist. Bella's one of them. The first thing I noticed about her was just this like deep-seated and constant insecurity, which is very realistic for a teenage girl, right? We've all been there. She doesn't hold herself in a very high regard, and she specifically doesn't hold her needs in a very high regard. If someone else needs something and it contradicts with one of her needs, then she's very quick to give up whatever it is she needs for other people. So the motivation for her move to Forks is that her mom has this boyfriend who's a minor league baseball player, and he travels around a bunch to play minor league baseball. Her mom wants to travel with the boyfriend, and so Bella moves to Forks to live with her dad so that her mom is free to move around with the boyfriend. It's important that the mom did not ask her to do this. Bella took it upon herself to do so, even though she hates Forks. And she goes through the whole move like not excited for it. She knows she's going to have a horrible time finishing school, but she's only got about a year and a half left of high school. So from her perspective, it's like, I'll just suffer for a year and a half and then my mom can be happy now. So we're seeing her kind of sacrifice herself for others. She's also very aware of how she's perceived at all times, which again, I feel is very consistent with that of a teenage girl. So she is very aware of how her classmates are perceiving her at all times. Her whole first day of school, she's noticing how all of her different classmates are reacting to her. She spends like a lot of time and a lot of her headspace is dominated by thinking about what other people think of her. I feel like this makes her reaction to Edward very realistic. When she and Edward meet, Edward is looking at her like, I hate you. He looks almost like disgusted and he like goes running out of the room right when the class ends. And she's like, what the hell was that guy's problem? I feel like at this point, Stephanie Meyer has established Bella would become obsessive over this because she cares so much what other people think of her and she cares so much about pleasing other people. That being said, she is willing to stand up for herself when threatened, and that's going to become important later. We see time and time again with her and her classmates and her dad and, you know, the Cullens and all that, that like when she is threatened, she will stand up for herself, even though she's like very quick to make the decision herself to give up her needs for others. If other people are being rude to her, she is also very quick to give them some sass back. And really the only times we see her being really confident in standing up for herself is when she is threatened. So again, when Edward reacts really harshly to her, you can see how she would become kind of obsessive over that. And she would care a lot what he thinks of her, both out of anger and out of this insecurity. Like she cares a lot what everybody in the town thinks of her, but she's also like, I didn't really deserve that from him and I don't know why he did that. A more confident character probably would have let that go and would not have become so obsessed with Edward. But she was thinking about that like all weekend, and when he didn't come back to school for a while, she was like convinced it was because of her and could not figure out why and was like obsessing over this. And I feel like it's built within her character to do that, and that feels very realistic for her. That would motivate her. She would want to find out what is going on with Edward. So she becomes super curious about him, and especially when he comes back to school and he's just being super nice to her out of the blue, she's super confused by this. And she's just like, what is this guy's problem? Why is he so wishy-washy? What is going on? It seems like she's only fully confident and fully herself when she's being threatened by other people. She stands up for herself. She's confident in those moments. So how interesting is it that she seems to find a lot of peace around Edward? She feels very safe around him. And he tells her all the time, you should be scared of me. I am a threat to you. I am a vampire. I want to drink your blood. You smell delicious to me. And she's just like, I don't care. I feel really safe around you. And I feel like we see this built into her character in other places. Even when it comes to seeing her in Port Angeles, like she's being threatened by all these guys and she wants to fight them instead of running away. And even Edward's like, that was so stupid. You should have run. You should have screamed. And she's like, oh yeah, I probably should have. So we see her time and time again, like being threatened, and those being the moments that she's confident in standing up for herself. So when she's the most threatened, when she's around Edward, is when she's like at her most confident. So it does feel kind of like built in there that would make sense. It's more of a metaphoric thing than like a character thing. Like in real life, would that play out within a person? Probably not. Real life people don't always make good characters, right? And I feel like this idea being built into her character gives some of the justification for why she's not scared of Edward, and she actually feels very herself around him. But the most important piece of Bella's character, above anything else, is that she really did resonate with 12-year-old girls. Even Marissa, like when we get into the interview, she talks about how she really related to Bella and her experiences. And I posted on both Instagram and TikTok and asked people to kind of pitch in, like, how old were you when you read Twilight? And what were your thoughts back then? And what do you think of it now? And all that kind of thing, right? Honestly, like, no young girls that I surveyed said that they didn't feel like they could relate to her. Like, everybody said they really resonated with her, and not only that, but that it helped them bond with their mom. And reading all of those comments like made me really happy because it brought me back to my childhood and me reading the books, and I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah, my mom and I did read these books together. We both read them and we talked about them a bunch, and we totally bonded over them, and we went to see the movies together. I have this very clear memory of her like harassing me to finish Breaking Dawn so that she could read it. We bought like one copy for the house, right? But then she really wanted to read it, but she let me read it first. She was just on me the whole time, like, are you done with it yet? Are you done with it yet? Are you done with it yet? And so it was fun to like think back on that stuff. Yeah, you know, that did give me something to bond with my mom over, and it made me like appreciate my mom. And I already talked to her about it. Love you, Mom, if you're watching this. I don't know that she loves Twilight enough to watch an hour of me talking about it. She does listen to me babble all the time, but maybe she's watching, who knows. But that seemed to be the consensus. Like, multiple people talked about resonating with her and her character not just resonating with them, but their mothers, and their mothers really bonding with them over the books. Reading it as an adult, I can remember back to when I felt a lot of how Bella did, and I certainly think there is a world in which I could still feel that way as an adult. It comes back into like that idea of insecurity and self-worth. And that's something I have been working on a lot recently, but I can totally picture a world in which if I had not been working on that in the past like year or two, how I could still read this book and really resonate with Bella. I understand what it feels like to feel like my needs aren't as important as other people's. So yeah, I don't know. I think she's really relatable, and I think she's actually very well written, like in isolation. Her as a character makes sense and she feels cohesive. One of the number one criticisms you'll see about this book is that Edward's been alive for 117 years. He's been a vampire for 100 years exactly, and he got turned at 17. No one's figured out what he is until Bella. And he's had no interest in anyone else until Bella. Well, we find out later in the book that Edward can't read Bella's mind. So his whole existence as a vampire, he's been able to read literally everyone's mind, and he only can't read hers. I feel like his obsession with her makes sense because A, it's something new and something different in like the monotony that is his life. I don't know, wouldn't you? Like, if you could read everybody's mind and then there was just one random person whose mind you couldn't read, would you not become obsessed with figuring out why and getting to know them and knowing what was inside their head? I don't know. I just feel like that makes sense too. And it also kind of like matches with her character, like that guardedness that Stephanie Meyer has given her within her own mind kind of translates into how she is as a person. She doesn't really open up to people, and she seems to be very much a loner until Edward comes into play. And she doesn't even really rely on her parents. Also, Bella witnesses Edward doing like a bunch of superhuman stuff that he never would have done for like anybody else. He saves her life from the car accident, and he's really unable to gaslight her. He tries so hard to convince her that she saw things wrong and she hit her head. She's like not to be convinced the whole time. She's like, I did not hit my head, dude. I don't know why you keep telling everybody I hit my head. I didn't hit my head, and I saw what I saw, and you ran across the parking lot super fast, and you blocked the car, and then you picked it up, and then you did all this other crazy shit. He seriously cannot convince her that it didn't happen. So I feel like that also comes into play. Like, she witnessed him doing a bunch of superhuman stuff, so she's thinking he is not human, he is something else. And also, Stephanie Meyer talks in the illustrated guide here about how the whole reason she invented Jacob's character was to be the person who told Bella about the vampire lore. So Edward was already a vampire, but she was trying to figure out how to explain how Bella figured it out, because how does she get from he's not human to he's a vampire? So it shows that she was thinking about these kind of things, right? She wants a realistic way for Bella to have figured it out. She was looking around, she found the tribe nearby, was like, oh, they have some lore about this, let me use some of that now. It's pretty well known that Stephanie Meyer's portrayal of Native American individuals in the book is, we'll say questionable at best. Edward was already a vampire in Stephanie Meyer's like imagining of this book, and she was trying to figure out, like I said, how Bella figures out that he's a vampire. And when she was looking around the area of Forks, she found out about the Quileute Tribe, which is a tribe that Jacob's from, and that they have some lore about vampires and werewolves, and then she leveraged a lot of that for the book. That is in and of itself its own video and topic that I'm probably not the best person to represent. A lot of cultural appropriation, a lot of stereotypical representation. We are going to talk about it more in depth when we get to New Moon, because I feel like it comes into play a lot more there, and so it's probably better discussed there. But just as a heads up, I'm probably not going to be diving into it too deep just because I myself am not Native American, so I don't think anybody really wants my opinion on her appropriation, right? But I also would feel remiss to have like not mentioned it at all. I didn't want to just like brush over it and not take that into account when analyzing the book, that as authors, like, we have a responsibility to represent populations well, not like take important and cultural and ceremonial lore and turn it into like a romance about vampires if we're like not from that culture. You know what I'm saying? And I found some really good articles on it, but like I said, I think that's better discussed in New Moon with the plot of New Moon. Once again, I just didn't want to brush past it without saying anything. And now we have to talk about Edward, and I am afraid I have way less nice things to say. Edward is an 117-year-old vampire who's enrolled in a high school. That's a little weird. It's a little weird that they chose to enroll in a high school, but I guess we'll just have to brush past that. They want to live normal lives, and at some point he says, the younger we pretend to be right when we move somewhere, the longer we can be there. I've been bringing up Twilight a lot in conversation over the past few weeks, and I actually recently had someone bring up to me that they totally could have lived in more of a major metropolitan area like Seattle, and then they could have just moved around different areas of Seattle if their neighbors like somehow noticed that they weren't aging. But even then, would they really have had to do that? Like, I don't know, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to my immediate neighbors at the very least. Like, how long would someone have to live next to them to realize they never really age? And if that was starting to happen, then they could just pick up and move to a different part of the city, and that way they could live in the same city literally forever and never have problems. And I was like, now that you've pointed that out, yeah, like they moved to like a small town where everybody knows everybody, so it's way harder to not age in that kind of space. But if they just moved to a bigger city, they could have not been high school students and it would have been fine. So it is a little bit weird that they like actively chose to go to high school. But hey, you get bored after 100 years of life. They were bored, they wanted to go back to high school, which everybody knows is super riveting and interesting, and you learn all really important stuff about life. Anyway. So in this book, we only really see Edward through Bella's eyes. I do have plans to go through the entire series, so we will eventually read Midnight Sun. When we do, I'm sure we will dive very, very deep into Edward's psyche. But for this book, we only get the window through Bella's eyes. So we can only really analyze him through Bella's eyes. And honestly, we don't even really know that much about him. You'll hear from people that he's really moody and broody, but I don't actually think so. I think in the beginning of the book, he just has these really strong mood swings where sometimes he's really kind to her and sometimes he's really not. And then eventually when they kind of DTR, he turns into a really nice and almost like goofy person. And so it's really interesting, like, to hear that the meadow was kind of like the starting point for her, and then she worked backwards and forwards from the meadow, because it very much felt like Edward was a different person after the meadow scene. I can kind of see how that was almost like the divide of the book, where in the beginning he's like this mood swingy, moody, broody stalker kind of person. Then in the back half of the book, he's just like a nice boyfriend. And so it's kind of hard to like deeply analyze him because there's almost these two like competing pieces. Like I said in the beginning, he has like absolute stalker tendencies. Not tendencies, he has stalker behavior. He is a stalker. He like breaks into her house and watches her sleep. And then he flat out tells her that. And she's just like, yeah, I'm cool with that. And his mood swings like alter her behavior. Having very harsh mood swings is a form of manipulation in relationships. Edward having these really sharp and really sudden mood swings is manipulating Bella. And I think without realizing it, Stephanie Meyer showed that. I don't think she thinks of Edward as emotionally manipulative, but she was actually writing relatively realistic characters where their interactions were realistic. And so Edward's mood swings lead Bella to try and figure out what of her behavior caused his mood swings. So what is it that she did that made him get super angry all of a sudden? And that is how mood swings affect relationships in real life. That's why it's a form of manipulation. Because if you're being really lovey in one moment and then you completely take that love away in the next, of course that person's going to think to themselves, why did they do that? Why did they take their love away? What did I do to make them angry? Are they mad at me, right? Stephanie Meyer almost like accidentally shows this, because I don't think she meant to write Edward as an emotional manipulator, but we see how his mood swings have that impact on Bella's behavior and how she's constantly trying to figure out why he's so angry at her all the time. I cannot stress enough, he breaks into her house and watches her sleep without her knowing or consenting. So, okay. Listen, I have to be real. I have to be honest. As much as I have a personal love for Edward, and as much as I had like the fattest crush on him when I was a little kid, I don't think portraying him in this way is positive. I wouldn't be the first person to say that, and I won't be the last. It is detrimental to teach little girls that this kind of behavior is okay. You don't want a guy who's stalking you, and you don't want a guy who has mood swings. It's very damaging to portray love interests in this like so protective, they're controlling kind of way. If you don't think that it is damaging, let me say a few things and then maybe you'll change your mind. The first is every straight woman has dated at least one man who straight up didn't like them. I've done it. We've all done it. Okay. For some reason, men will date women they don't like and they treat them like shit, and women just put up with it. We've all had that girlfriend that we were trying to convince to break up with a man for so long because he was so horrible to her and she just would never do it. And I think when you look at a lot of the media, like it's not just Twilight. And so there is kind of that defense of Twilight specifically because it is not just Twilight, but it is very prevalent in the romance genre. And especially within fantasy romance, that the heroes are very controlling and that they use their protectiveness as an excuse for that controllingness. And that is so dangerous. That is so dangerous to teach. The other thing I want to say to convince you as to why this is so bad, I want to ask you basically one simple question. Can you describe a protective man? A lot of people, when describing a protective man, would almost always put an asterisk on it and to say they don't get controlling with it. If you're talking about an actually protective man, that he is protective but not controlling. Like you have to put that asterisk on it always. I would make the argument that we have to separate these two personality traits entirely. And so I want to take kind of a step aside here to describe what I think a actually protective man is actually like. What is the difference? And that we should just call men who are controlling. Like we don't say like, oh, they're trying to be protective, but they get a little controlling. No, they are controlling, okay? And the core difference, the main difference, whether or not they ask you to change your behavior. So if he tries to tell you that you can't go somewhere, or that you can't wear something, or that you can't see someone because it's not safe, that's controlling. The interesting thing about controlling men is that they actually almost don't take their own partner's concerns seriously. So if you're dating a controlling man and you tell him you feel unsafe in a situation, they almost don't even care. In their mind, it's like they're the one that dictates whether or not a situation is unsafe for you. And what it all boils down to is that they don't trust you to know when a situation is unsafe and when it isn't. But that's almost giving them too much credit because again, that's still making it about protection. So it's still saying he's trying to protect you, but by like controlling your behavior and almost infantilizing you and treating you like you don't know what situations are safe for you and what aren't. And so he has to decide what those situations are for you. But again, that's still giving them too much credit. I do think that a lot of times it is malicious and a lot of times they know what they're doing. Abusers are malicious. And I think we make the mistake of often trying to say it's not malicious, they just don't know what they're doing. And I think more often than not, these men do know what they're doing. They do know what they're doing to their partners and they want to have that kind of control over them. And they're just using this as an excuse. And actually protective man, I wrote up a really good thing here and I'm actually just going to read it because I don't think I'm going to be able to like recite it. An actually protective man is literally just going to stand up for you against threats, either emotionally or physically. They trust you to know when you're in danger and to ask them for help if you need it and are always willing to provide the help that you need. They take how you feel about what's happening around you as just as important as what is actually happening, and they respect your boundaries and never ask you to change your behavior and how you live your life. They never tell you where to go or who to see. That is so important to understand. And I do think it's really dangerous to portray Edward in that way because you know your audience is young women, and so you're showing this really stalkery and controlling guy, but almost as though it's sexy. And it brings me back to like that joke about like mafia romances and stuff, where it's like, yeah, I don't want to get kidnapped and have you go on like a one-man adventure where you kill a bunch of people to save me. But it's nice to think that you would. It's like about the fantasy of it, right? Like I don't actually want us to be in any danger, but I love thinking about being in danger and you saving me. That is different from fantasizing about a man stalking you. I'm sorry, it just is. It's okay to like have somewhat like morbid fantasies, but like I can't like conceptualize as an adult thinking like, oh yes, you know what I want? A man parked outside my house because he just loves me so much. Like no, that's not a sexy fantasy. And that's not a fantasy that we want to be selling as sexy to these young girls. So that is a knock on Edward. But like I said, it's weird because he almost turns into like a completely different person at the halfway point of the book. So once the meadow happens, it's like he turns into this like goofy, silly, fun boyfriend who's like super supportive and like comfortable. And he doesn't turn like back into his weirdness until there is an actual danger. But you can justify some of that because Edward is a vampire. James, who's like the threat to Bella, is also a vampire. And so Edward's remarks that like Bella doesn't really understand the vampire world is kind of fair. In that situation, Bella maybe doesn't conceptualize exactly how much danger she's in. And Edward not only knows the vampire world super well, but he's seen the inside of James's mind. I think in that situation specifically, it kind of makes sense that he's a little bit like, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to keep you safe. But it is also kind of a knock on him because you see him in the car with Alice and Emmett, and the scene like really surprised me. I don't remember the scene at all from when I read it when I was a kid, but they're in the car and they're freaking out because James is like coming after Bella, and Edward is like, we're just driving away from the city right now. We're getting you away. We're never coming back. And Bella is the one who comes up with the plan of like what to do. Edward will not listen to her at all, and it's Alice and Emmett who end up like listening to her, and they are the ones who convince Edward to like hear her plan out. And that kind of bothered me because I was like, at this point, I don't know, you two have like bonded and we've seen Edward like be nice to her for a long time. So to see her like shutting her down so completely and like not even wanting to hear her say what she had to say. But again, you can like, they're in danger and they're trying to like get away from danger, and he's freaking out. And again, he's a vampire and Edward could read his mind, and he's just like, oh, you couldn't read his mind. You couldn't see what he said. So there's like some justification there, but that part kind of bothered me too. Okay, so he opens up to her after the meadow. And therein lies like another main criticism of Twilight, which is that Edward and Bella fall in love really, really quickly. And upon the reread, I can agree with that. They really didn't interact that much before they say I love you to each other. A big defense of this that people often say is that like, hey, they're teenagers. Teenagers fall in love like that, supposedly. They're really just not able to tell the difference between infatuation and love because they haven't lived enough life yet. So to them, that infatuation stage of a relationship, that is love. That is what love feels like. If Edward and Bella were like really interested in each other and kind of in this infatuation stage as teenagers, then it makes sense that they would be like, I love you, like so quick. I know a lot of high school relationships that were saying I love you after like a week. Is it kind of silly? Is it kind of goofy? Yes. Is there a lot more at play here because Edward is also a vampire? Yes. But I don't personally really knock the book for that, especially because A, it's realistic for teenagers to do that, but B, would it really have been better any other way? I took the liberty of thinking through a few other scenarios that Stephanie Meyer could have followed where Bella and Edward spend more time together before saying I love you to each other, right? So the alternatives are, one, I completely missed my finger there. One, that Bella and Edward spend a lot more time together before all the vampiric stuff happens. So Bella has no idea that he's not human and she's just bonding with him as a human, and then she finds out later that he's a vampire. The problem here just being you're trying to hook your reader, you're trying to keep them interested. Bella already has to do the whole move in the introduction to school. Like there's actually a lot of plot that happens before she really spends any time with Edward whatsoever. So how much of the book are you going to make people read before the vampire stuff comes in? You got to make sure you're keeping the reader hooked. And if you don't tell them, hey, by the way, there's something going on with this Edward guy that's kind of strange. I mean, I guess it's still a romance, so you're still hooked, but still like maybe that'd be really funny. Maybe that actually would be a really smart choice. That you're like halfway through a romance and then the main character just like randomly drops in that they're like some kind of monster. So it wasn't like a plot of the whole book, but it just like comes in halfway through. That actually might be kind of funny. Tell me if I bet you someone's done that before. Has anybody read a book like that? That might actually be kind of good. But anyway, I say that to say that I don't think that would have worked for the book. After Bella finds out that Edward is not human, but before they really have the I love you talk and Edward breaks down everything about the vampire world, then they bond a bunch. I don't know, that's kind of hard to do too, because it's like, again, it's like Bella was just like pestering him to like tell her what was going on, and she really wanted to like understand what was going on with him. If you really did witness someone doing a bunch of superhuman stuff, would you have just let it go and been like, okay, maybe you're not human, but I'm not gonna like dig that deep into it? And if Stephanie Meyer dragged out too long Bella figuring out what Edward is, then the reader could get bored. However, that being said, I feel like of all the scenarios I'm concocting here, that would probably be the best one. Like if she were to change something about it now, I think having them interact a little bit more between the weird stuff happening and Bella finding out officially that Edward's a vampire probably would have been best. And I genuinely just think that one scene of them interacting like they did in the second half of the book would have done it for people, and it would have been better. That's kind of a nitpicky change, but in the second half of the book, you see a lot of chemistry between Edward and Bella, and they actually do seem like a pretty cute couple, and you are kind of rooting for them, and you can see why they love each other and how they've bonded. You can feel the chemistry. And I think just having like one scene like that in the beginning, beyond them doing like they do like the microscope reads together and they hand the microscope back and forth, but that's like the first time they were nice to each other. So I think having another scene like that, or like the Port Angeles scene where they're driving back, not even just like adding another scene, almost just picking one of those scenes to not have Edward have a crazy mood swing so that they can actually bond. and we just see them actually just sitting there talking to each other and hanging out and all that, I think that would have gone a long way to help people like not feel like it just kind of comes out of nowhere that they say I love you to each other. But again, they're teenagers, and when I was in high school, like I said, I knew relationships where people said I love you to each other after they'd known each other literally a week. The third alternative is that Edward kind of gives Bella the lowdown on the whole vampire world before they say I love you and really like commit to each other in a relationship, and then they have a bit of time where they're spending time together and then they say I love you. This one's really like a trade-off for me, because if Edward wasn't sure that he and Bella were gonna like be together long term, why would he be telling her all that? So I almost think they kind of need to DTR to let that happen. So that's why I'm saying I think that second option I came up with probably would be best if you were changing something about it in hindsight. And then in the second half of the book, they are kind of cute. I will say, they are kind of cute. And like I said, Edward's a lot goofier than I was expecting, and he does a lot of silly things, especially when they're hanging out at the Cullen house and he can really fully be himself. So those are the characters. Those are the two like main characters that I wanted to talk about. Now let's dive into the actual plot of the book. So we talked a little bit about their love affair, but I wanted to call out a few other things I found really interesting upon the reread. The first being that I want to see, I'm not going to be able to confirm this until I read Midnight Sun, unfortunately, but I do know that Stephanie Meyer really made an effort to match Midnight Sun to the plot of Twilight. I want to try and see if the first time that Bella dreams of Edward is the first time that Edward actually goes and visits her in her bedroom. So I'm just saying that now for you guys to hold me accountable when I eventually read Midnight Sun, like to double check that. Remind me to do that. When I do, what book comes before that? I think Life and Death. I think Life and Death is the one she wrote before Midnight Sun, because I want to read them in order of like when she wrote them and put them out. So I'm going to make it through the main 4, and then I'm going to do The Secret Life of Bree Tanner and Life and Death, and I have to look up what order those two are in. And then I'm going to do Midnight Sun. Also, I got to shout out Charlie, obviously. I think if I made the whole video and I didn't shout out Charlie, you guys were going to be like, girl, Charlie is such an amazing book dad. I don't know, he just feels very real. There's so many layers to it. The first is that Charlie is just naturally a quiet person. He's already not gonna like really be getting in Bella's face a lot. He also didn't get to see a lot of her childhood. She goes to live with him and they don't really have like a typical father-daughter relationship, but it is still much more father-daughter than her relationship is with her mom. Her mom and dad are divorced, right? And she very much took care of her mom a lot when she was a child, and her dad, when she moves in with him, he starts doing a lot of like fatherly stuff for her. Like he gets her a car. He makes sure that she has chains on her tires when it snows. And Bella is like so touched by this simple act of almost parenthood, him just making sure that she's safe on her drive to school, touched her so deeply as like such a special gesture. I feel like Charlie is a representation of what actually protective looks like, because he obviously wants Bella to be safe, and he puts the chains on her tires. He's a little bit iffy about her going on a date when he thought it was Emmett, because he thinks Emmett like looks really old to be in high school, and he's like a little bit uncomfortable with the idea of her dating Emmett. But once he finds out it's Edward, he's like, okay, that's fine. And the only point in the book where I was like, this is so unrealistic, is when she's going on the date with Edward to go play baseball, and so she tells her dad like, oh, Edward's my boyfriend, and they're having that whole conversation, which is hilariously awkward and very reminiscent for me of like trying to talk to my dad about boys when I was in high school. She really nailed that awkward father-daughter conversation about a first boyfriend. I mean, it was beautiful to read. They go outside and they see that Edward has this like massive Jeep, and really it's Emmett's Jeep, but he doesn't say that. I can tell you that if I was gonna go on a date when I was in high school and my dad walked outside and the dude had like a massive tricked out Jeep with like giant wheels and no roof, there is no way in hell I'm going on that date. Like he'd be like, absolutely not, get back inside. I don't know what this is, but no. And that was the only time in the whole book that I was like, I feel like she kind of missed the mark on that one. I feel like Charlie shouldn't have seen the car, because I feel like as soon as Charlie saw the car, he'd have been like, you get back inside right now. You are not getting into this car with this man. Holy shit. But anyway, I don't know. I love Charlie. The other thing that I really, really liked about the climax specifically, when James is chasing Bella and they like go across the country to Phoenix and all that, I never appreciated when I was a kid how accurate her like depiction of the airport was and all that. Because I mean, when I was a kid, I didn't know that stuff. Like I didn't know the street layout when I was like 12 reading this. I'd never driven a car. A lot of the climax of this book takes place with like Bella kind of rushing through the streets of Phoenix. it's like very realistic. When she's describing like the different streets and like where the hotel is in relation to the airport and like where Bella's mom's house is, like she gives the actual cross streets. I almost don't want to advertise this because I don't want insane people to like go to those cross streets, but I was kind of tempted to be one of those insane people just for the video and go to the cross streets of the dance studio and see if there was actually a dance studio there. I mean, she wrote it like 20 years ago. It came out in 2005. So if it was there, it probably isn't there anymore. Even that, like she gives the cross streets, and then she had said that Bella's mom lives around the corner. And then when Bella gives the address to the cab driver, he says, "Oh, that's in Scottsdale." And it is in Scottsdale. And it's like little details like that that show you how as readers, we just become so desensitized to authors getting details wrong of things we're familiar with. Like people who write books that take place in Phoenix and it's like the desert. I will never forget, there's a Criminal Minds episode that takes place supposedly in Phoenix, Arizona, that when they cut to Phoenix, they're literally just in the middle of a desert. Where they're going is so remote that they have to like ride horses to get there. Yep. I rode my horse to school every day. We're all super used to seeing depictions of our hometowns or of our professions or whatever that aren't super accurate, and there's a certain like level of suspend your disbelief that you have to have. And typically when I see that something's going to take place in Phoenix, the only detail they're going to include is that it's basically a giant suburb and that it's really, really hot. And as somebody who's born and raised in Phoenix and still lives there and actually lives in Scottsdale, it was just like the tiniest little bit of joy to like read this and actually be able to picture it on the streets of Phoenix and like know where Bella was at all times. That was very, very fun. I did enjoy that a lot. And that's why they say, write what you know, because Stephanie Meyer was born and raised here and she still lives here. She might be my neighbor. I'm just kidding. Her neighborhood has to be way nicer than mine. There's no way she lives in my neighborhood. She loves the city, and you could tell that in the writing, and it made me appreciate it because I love the city and I love reading here. Reading here? I do love reading here. I also like living here. There was a ton of foreshadowing to the idea that Edward was going to leave in New Moon. I know we haven't gotten to New Moon yet, and I'm obviously going to read it and make a video about it and all that, but I just feel like too much foreshadowing. I'm going to be real. New Moon is my least favorite book because I'm Team Edward all the way, and I genuinely don't get the point of Team Jacob. Like I've said, I've been talking to a bunch of my friends about this over the past few weeks, and one of my friends straight up was like, I've never understood the whole Team Jacob thing. Like, even when I read the books and watched the movies, like, he was never an option. And I'm like, that's how I feel about it. I don't feel like Jacob was ever a genuine option for Bella. And so that's why I thought it was fascinating to read this and find out that's not actually true. Stephanie Meyer talks about how by the time she finished New Moon, she knew what direction the whole series was going to end and she knew how it would end. But it was fascinating to read her talk about how she's kind of obsessed with this idea that she put into Alice. Alice has these visions of the future, but they're dependent on people's decisions because the future changes with people's decisions. So as people change their minds about things, things change in the visions that she sees. Stephanie Meyer is kind of obsessed with this idea, with this like concept of the decisions you make define your future. And so she talks about how like the plot of New Moon was really, really important, and however New Moon ended kind of indicated how the whole series ended, and that there actually maybe was an outcome in which she did end up with Jacob, which I find really fascinating to read because when I was a kid, having read the whole book, like to me, it didn't ever feel like she was ever going to end up with Jacob. So I don't know how realistic that possibility actually was, but it was super interesting to read that it actually was a possibility in Stephanie Meyer's mind, and that if she had ended New Moon a certain way, maybe the eventual plot of all 4 books would have been that she ended up with Jacob and staying human. But that's all I really have prepared to talk about. I was kind of all over the place. I gave up on doing the like in plot order discussion because I just feel like for Twilight, like nobody needs me recounting the exact plot. We all know the plot of Twilight. Okay, if you clicked on this video, you know the plot of Twilight. So I guess there is the grand question here at the end. Is it a good book? Boy, howdy, is that hard to answer. My heart wants to say yes. I would feel remiss just giving it like 100% a stamp of saying like, yes, she was successful at what she was trying to do. It was a good book written for 12-year-olds. It's obviously super successful. She doesn't need my stamp of approval. And I would love to just end it there. I don't think we can just gloss over the way that she treated the Quileute Tribe, the way she depicted them and what she kind of did with their lore. And I also don't think we can just gloss over the problematic representation of Edward and relationships in general. Again, I'm not telling you what to think, right? I just think it's all information to be taken into account for you to form your opinion. For the problematic relationship perspective, yes, I think in general, we should stop doing it, like as authors. It's really hard for me to villainize specifically Twilight for that, because this is such a common thing, again, not just in romance, but in fantasy romance. Like, fantasy romance as a genre has such a problem with having problematic love interests. And so it's very hard for me to say, like, this book specifically is such a problem. But then this book kind of put that genre on the map. Like, it did exist before Twilight came out, but Twilight made vampire romance really popular. So we'll never know if it would be as common within fantasy romance for the vampire love interest sexy men to be so, like, overly controlling. Like, we don't know how much of that actually comes from this being almost the source material for the entire genre. Again, it's not the first. There were other books that came before it, but it really did make the genre super duper popular and a lot more well known. So we'll never know. Like I said, Twilight reached a height where it impacted so many people that maybe you can villainize it all on its own. There were so many young girls, impressionable young girls, who read this, and that probably made an impression on their opinion. So it's hard. I'm not telling you what to think. Those are the two sides of it. I can't really decide how I feel. I think nostalgia clouds my opinion a lot. It's very hard for me to, like, fully say that this book is a negative. I certainly don't think it shouldn't have been written. I'm just saying there were things I would change about it, and certainly their relationship would be one of them. Also, the Quileute Tribe. I just think everything to do with that. As far as commentary on that, when it comes to how they were depicted in the book and how a lot of their lore was almost taken for the book, I feel like all of that, it just gets really swept under the rug when it comes to talking about Twilight. And so I would have felt really remiss, like, finishing off the video without talking about that at all. But again, then it's kind of like, I don't want to read these articles and regurgitate them to you. So just go read the articles. I highly recommend you do. And remember that it is okay to look back on literature and criticize it for maybe some of the more damaging aspects. We can look at Twilight and say, this was wrong of Stephanie Meyer to do. And I think that we should. It's hard to give it, like, an overall rating for those reasons. My opinion on it ends up just as polarizing as the world's. There are good things about it and there are bad things about it. But whether or not people want to accept it, it is, like, just such a core piece of our culture as a country. It takes a very special author to be able to do that. And so I do think that should be celebrated. When we look at these books that have really stood the test of time that are still relevant to this day, Twilight is at the top of that list. And Twilight will be relevant to talk about for a long time still. And as authors, we can only dream to write something that stays in the public eye for that long. I am going to pass it along to the interview that I did with Marissa now to talk a little bit more about Twilight and the movie and just her opinions on the book in general. And then I'll bring you back to close it out. Hello, everybody. This is my friend Marissa.
I am on a channel called TheReviewCrew here on YouTube. We actually collabed before on the what the fuck was that book called?
Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes.
Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes movie on our channel. We did a little collab on that. So now I'm here to talk about the Twilight movie. Yeah, and so I run that channel with my husband, and we've just been doing that for a little over a year now. So
Yay! Yeah. And their channel's awesome, so you should definitely check it out. I will link it in the description. But since she's a movie expert and also a Twilight expert, I thought it would be great to have her on to talk about the Twilight movie. So it was intended for a tween audience, essentially, right? Like middle school, early high school age. So how old were you when you read/watched Twilight for the first time?
I was in 7th grade. Okay. So I think I was like 12 or 13. I feel like the story resonated so much for me personally because I grew up in a Catholic school, private Catholic school. And when I left 6th grade, I went to a public school in 7th grade. So I left all my friends, went to this new place, knew nobody, and then everyone's talking about Twilight. And so I pick it up finally after, people were talking about it. I resonated so much with Bella.
Yeah, her and her move and all that.
Yeah, because she moved and she felt so alone. And I was just like, oh my gosh. And that's the age where you're figuring out like your relationships. You're having crushes. You're like forming feelings for people. That's what I was doing at the time. And so I was like, this is what love is supposed to be like. This guy's supposed to come into my room. Like, you know what I mean?
Like, creep in and watch me sleep. And so you feel like you did really like resonate with her character?
Absolutely.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm. Especially because she's from Arizona.
Do you feel like the insecurity of her character is like also something that you resonated with?
I mean, I would say yes. I mean, I feel like that's just kind of a part of being a woman almost is like, it's really hard to have confidence skills unless you're like intrinsically like born
My storage ran out, by the way, so oh my god, and now someone's calling me. This is why I need a camera. Subscribe so I can buy a camera. Anyway, back to Twilight. So you were saying about her insecurity being a woman.
Yeah, and so, like, yeah, unless you're, like, intrinsically confident and you have, like, really confident older people in your life, like, I feel like it's really hard to just go out into the world and be like, yes, I am beautiful and I am smart. Like, yes, everyone is beautiful and probably a little bit intelligent, maybe. I don't know you. It is relatable. It is very relatable.
Yeah.
Not feeling like you're enough.
Do you feel like that came across in the movie in her character?
Not entirely. She was more so like the not like other girls kind of girl, right? And it's weird to say that she is relatable in that sense because it's like a lot of girls are relating to being not like other girls, which makes you like other girls. So it's just like, it's a whole weird cycle there. I feel like even though the movie is like super revolutionary, like it's so impactful to our culture, like we're sitting here 15 years later talking about it. Like it is a staple in movie history, whether you like it or not. I love the movie. Her character, I think, wasn't really portrayed in the best way possible. I think on screen, you know, a lot of people poke at Kristen Stewart's acting in it, but I think a lot of that comes from the direction. I can't remember the director's name. Do you remember the director's name?
No, I'll put it on the screen for you guys.
She was an interesting director. I'll say that. She was interesting. At my bachelorette party, we dressed up as Twilight characters and then watched the commentary cut of like the director's cut of the first movie, and she is so weird. And I mean, I have to give her like credit where it's due because she made the phenomenon. Like she started the phenomenon, which is Twilight. She did the blue filters. She casted the right people, right? She brought it all together, but at the same time, she did some weird stuff. Like she was borderline sexually harassing Robert Pattinson, like during his roles, like not like during production, but like during the commentary. She would be like, "Oh, he's so hot. He's so good looking." Like it's crazy. It's crazy.
That is really, really weird. I didn't know that existed. I want to see that now.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
I have it. I think I have it for all of them because I have the Blu-ray collection of all of them. So I have like bonus discs.
So she was like obsessed with him, obviously.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I have this whole theory, okay, that people who are like Team Jacob fans, it was because they more watched the movies than read the books. And people who were like Team Edward more read the books and watched the movies. And I feel like it's all because they had Edward look like he was in pain every time he kissed her because, yeah, he's trying not to like eat her. I just feel like we could have passed on that. Like maybe it makes it realistic, but it's not fun or sexy to watch.
Yeah.
And when she kisses, I will admit, having watched them recently with a friend of mine, or some of them, we watched eclipse, that when she kisses Jacob, it's like so much more natural looking than when she kisses Edward. Like when you're actually watching it, you're like, oh, maybe I am Team Jacob watching this right now.
I was initially Team Jacob, and I think it's because, I mean, there's just so much toxicity in Twilight as a whole, but at the time, I was younger, right, and I really thought that Jacob was the more, like, calmer kind of person. Like, he brought out the more human side of Bella, and, like, that's what we're kind of taught is, like, better. She can either, like, go with Edward and like lose her humanity and like lose her family and everything, where like Jacob is warm and comforting and he's her friend and he helps her through depression and like, you know, just things that like a healthier relationship would do, you know? So yeah, I was a little more Team Jacob, but I think I'm Team Edward now. But I mean, it's all just a mess. It's a mess.
You already told each other you loved each other, but also they're 17. So like,
I mean, when you're young though, too, the emotions are so big. Yeah. Because it's the first time that you're really feeling something so extreme. So I think it makes sense. And you know, they're both to each other something different than they've ever experienced. And I feel like that sparks some kind of tension between them, whether it is like romance or like sexual or whatever. It's something different, like, right, like he can't read her mind, and so that's different. And then she like knows he's a vampire. Like it's different. He's not a human guy,
right? He's not like these other boys.
Yeah.
He's a vampire. So do you feel like the actors had chemistry in the movie?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was like one of those fangirls that was like, yes, they're dating in real life.
Because then there's like the elephant in the room always when you're talking about Twilight, which is that Stephanie Meyer is Mormon. And how much that and her like religious upbringing like plays into the books. And one of the things that I found super interesting upon the reread is actually how horny this book is. Like a little bit.
Okay. Okay. Have you read Midnight Sun?
Yes. And I'm going to read it for a video eventually.
Do you think that book is horny?
Yes.
I didn't think it was.
Really?
I thought Edward was such a fucking prude.
Really?
I did. And maybe I should read it again.
Okay.
Maybe.
I will let you know upon the reread. When I first read it, I did think it was horny.
I feel like this is silly to say, but he focused a little bit more on his vampire instincts, about like eating her, instead of like eating her. I just was a little disappointed because I felt a lot of sexual tension between Bella's brain and Edward, because she's like, I want to touch him, I want to kiss him, I want to...
Yeah.
But, you know, it's a little different, I guess, obviously, when you're dealing with a vampire that wants to suck blood from this girl.
Right, but I thought it was really fun, like, rereading it and having her, like, ask him basically about sex. Like, she never directly says it, but, like, you know, asks him if vampires can, like, do that? Because it's like, that's a valid question. And he was like, yeah, we can. Bella is horny for so much of this series.
Yes,
you know?
she really is.
Yeah.
She really is.
And you feel like that gets across, like, in the movie.
Absolutely. Yeah, that whole bedroom scene.
You know? All right. I guess we kind of answered this, but has your opinion changed, like, over the years on Twilight? So you read it, you watched it as a kid, and, like, as time has gone on, has your opinion on it changed?
I want to say like an easy no. I am like a diehard Twilight fan. I feel like I never really stopped liking it. Like I said, my bachelorette party was themed around it. I love it.
I'm the same way. Like, I get that there's problematic things about it. And of course, I'm going to address those in like the main core of the video. I still love it. To this, it's so hard for me not to love it. And even upon the reread, got through the part where he's like, yeah, I've been watching you sleep. And she's like, I've been talking in my sleep. And like, that's the piece of it she cares about. And I was like, girl, really? And then I just like turned the page and kept enjoying myself, you know? I was like, I'm having fun, you know? Do you feel like the movie was a good representation of the book? Like, you mentioned that you thought that Kristen Stewart's maybe portrayal of Bella wasn't the best portrayal of that character, but do you feel like the movie as a whole is representative of the book?
I would say so. I mean, I think some of the other movies are a little bit better, like cinematography wise. I do think it captured the essence of it, and I think what best captures the essence is the soundtrack. The OST is like so good. I guess it's not the OST. It's just the soundtrack.
Yeah, it was just
soundtrack,
like
all the
music.
All of the indie songs that they used were just revolutionary. Sets the mood so well for the series. Mm-hmm. And even Edward sings the song at the end when he's sucking the venom. Bad song, but he did that. He did that for us. He didn't have to go that hard, and he did.
He did. He was like, I'm gonna give you guys the performance of a lifetime. He's like, even as I hate my life. It's funny that you mentioned that because my friend and I rewatched Eclipse recently, and there was a proposal scene, and it was so awkward, and we were dying laughing at how awkward it was. And I told her, I said, I think it's just because they didn't put any music in the background. And then we looked up just like royalty-free, romantic, ambiance, whatever, and we just played it like while the scene was going, and I feel like a score would have solved so many of the issues with the movie. Like, I just think there are things that shouldn't be silent. But you mentioned the coloring. So how do you feel about the decision to use those blue filters and to really mess with the colors in the movie?
I love it.
Yeah.
I think it's iconic. It's iconic to the film. I think it adds to the mystery of everything and like feeling like you're in this separate universe where vampires and werewolves can exist. Like it can take you out of like the vibrancy of real life into like this darker world where vampires can exist.
I also feel like, and I wonder if you feel the same, that the blue filter is like 90% of the reason why the movie ended up as big as it did. Like, there's so many factors at play, but I feel like film bros hated that so much that they accidentally skyrocketed it into like talking about it. Like, everybody was talking about it, you know?
I think you might be right about it. I almost feel like that plays a little bit more into like the Twilight Renaissance. Like, Twilight is popular now unironically or whatever, but like I feel like a couple years ago it was like, let's make fun of Twilight, like that's so stupid, and now people are like still making fun of Twilight, but it's like because they love it. I feel like it played maybe more into that, where people were like, oh yeah, Twilight was so bad because of this and this and this, but yeah, they were probably saying it at the beginning too.
So how do you feel about the criticism of it?
The movie is by all means not perfect. Hardly any movies are. If we're gonna criticize anything, it should be about the relationships and about how romanticizing toxic relationships is very harmful to young people. I got introduced to this book when I first started dating, and this is my interpretation of what it's like to be in love, right? I'm learning through this book and then taking that into my real life. So I feel like I wanted a lot of like weird things from my significant others. I wanted them to always be there, or like, you know, I expected a lot from people in my life because of this. So like I feel like that is a very warranted criticism, but I feel like people who just hate on Twilight because they want to say, oh, it's a better love story than Twilight, they don't get it.
That's exactly how I feel, I guess, is like there's smart criticism and then there's like ugh, and like
right,
it's the same. Like I made the whole Mean Girls video where it's like basically everyone on TikTok just being like ugh, and I'm like, listen, there are fair criticisms of this movie, but like just being like, oh, it's dumb because it's got TikTok in it, they put TikTok in it, so the movie's dumb. It's like that's not that's not a smart take. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's the dumbest take I've ever heard, actually. And that's how I feel about a lot of the Twilight takes. It's like, yes, let's sit and talk about how the portrayal of romantic relationships in popular young adult series is like are impressionable upon girls, but then people just want to be like, oh, isn't it stupid that he sparkles? And you're like, okay, like, cool, great take, dude. Actress performances, we talked about Kristen Stewart. How do you feel about Robert Pattinson's performance as Edward?
I'm just trying to think about him. let me just think about him for a second.
Here he is.
I felt like he did a pretty good job. I mean, like you said before, that he has a lot of scenes where he's just kind of like like he's just really mad or broody or disgusted almost. I feel like he could have been, you know, a little less like that. I feel like there's definitely, you know, good chemistry and good moments in the book between the both of them, and I felt like the movie lost a little bit of that, and just like the awkwardness of maybe him trying to be a vampire that's thirsty. And I will say, when the movie first came out, I wasn't an Edward fan. Like, I went to the movie and there were girls screaming when he like goes into the cafeteria, and I was like, this is the ugliest man I've ever seen. That's also kind of why I was Team Jacob. I was like, who is that guy? I feel like his makeup was just a little over the top, and I mean, I know he's supposed to be a pale guy, but he just looked a little like the guy in Monsters Inc. that gets his lip sucked, you know, at the end of the movie, and it was just, I didn't feel for that.
Yeah.
Does that cover it enough?
I just feel like so. Yeah, it was a little like I think especially after reading it and hearing her emphasize just how beautiful he was supposed to be, I do think the makeup was really strange. Definitely seen like photo shoots and like things of Robert Pattinson where he looks attractive, but I feel like the way they styled him in the movie like did not make him look good. They went a little too uncanny valley where like realistically, yeah, he looked a little bit not human, but like also I want to find him sexy.
Yeah, and I think they did a really good job in the later movies, but I think the initial movie, it just is, I don't know, it just doesn't like hit as good as some of the other movies.
Yeah. Taylor Lautner, what did you think of him?
In the first movie?
He's just a little boy.
He's just a little kid. Well, okay, I can't say I don't have any thoughts on him because I had a poster of him in my room, and it was him. It was him from the first movie with his long ass hair. Came home every day, and he was staring at me.
You had long hair, Jacob, hanging on your wall. That is a choice.
Yeah, I was Team Jacob pretty hard. He had a glow up.
He did
in that movie.
Well, did you know they almost didn't have him keep playing Jacob?
Yeah, and then he had to like change his entire body to do it.
Yeah, because there is such a stark difference in the books they describe between like Jacob in the first book and Jacob in the second book. He's supposed to look like a grown man now, and it's like very startling for Bella. So they were literally just gonna cast a grown ass man, like a 25-year-old man, to just play Jacob for the rest of the series.
That would have been so weird. I hate, well, okay, so like they did that with Victoria, but I hate when they change the cast. I hate it.
But I'm happy they ended up going with him. Right.
Yeah, me too. I think he made it, the movie. And he's a terrible actor. He's a terrible actor. I'm sorry, Taylor Lautner. sorry. I watched this movie that he's in.
Yeah.
What the fuck is it called? It's called something so dumb. It's like an action movie. They were trying to basically make him be like the future Tom Cruise.
Oh.
And there are like so many A-list actors in that movie to like boost it. It was the worst movie I've ever seen.
Oh no. The funny thing is, I feel like I've only seen him in Twilight or Shark Boy and Lava Girl.
Yeah.
Like, those are basically the 2 movies I've seen of him. Who was your favorite actor in the movie then?
I'm a big Charlie stan.
The actor or the character or both?
Well, I mean, both. I feel like I've only really seen Billy Burke in this show, in this movie. But, I mean, he's a Delph. I'm sorry. I love him. He's great.
I love that you had his real name, just like off the dome. You could have held a gun to my head and I never could have told you Twilight Dad. I never could have told you. Maybe I'd have guessed Billy. He does kind of look like a Billy. One last like overarching question that I'll ask you about the movie and the book and all of that is, why do you think that Twilight was so successful?
I think it was so successful because it was the culmination of teenage girl audiences, the tween girl audience, and the power of like technology at the time, because I believe this came out right around the time where like Facebook was getting very popular. So there was a lot of connection with a lot of other people. And I talked about this in Gabby Bell's video a little bit. So I'm trying to be resident Twilight girly of YouTube. I talked about how the only other like huge novel to movie success at the time was Harry Potter. And that wasn't really focused on a story about romance. It wasn't a story focused on a female protagonist. So it really catered to this untapped audience in Hollywood that no one has really made movies for outside of like silly things, I guess. And yeah, I feel like it inspired so many other things like the Hunger Games. Like, you know, even though the stories are very different, Hollywood wanted to like continue the trend of like getting in female protagonists for this huge audience that can go crazy and buy all this merch and sell out movie theaters all over the country because they're obsessed with this this guy Robert Pattinson, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I feel like it's because of that.
I could totally see that. I think I asked on TikTok and on Instagram why, like, when people read it and if they liked it back then and what they liked about it, and I was shocked by the number of people who said it helped me bond with my mom. Like, a lot of mother-daughter duos both read it and, like, talked about it and bonded over it. And I think that, like, same with me. Like,
me too.
It almost made me, like, reflect on that, where I was like, my mom did read them with me.
Yeah.
And we did sit and talk about it, like, a lot.
That's crazy. I actually, like, you just, like, uncovered core memories for me, because I would literally go to every single midnight release for every movie. Like, we started with, like, maybe Harry Potter and stuff, but when it got to Twilight, when it got to Hunger Games, like, me and my mom were there at midnight every night at the theater, like, waiting for these movies to drop. Like, we were in it together. Like, yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, and same, like, my mom read all of them. We didn't go, like we did go see the movies, but it wasn't, like, the midnight premiere.
Yeah.
But I know, like, I very distinctly remember her, like, pestering me to finish the books when they would come out so that, like, she could read them after me. She very graciously let me read them first. And I am a quick reader, but she'd be like, are you done yet? Are you done yet? And then for a long time, New Moon, for some reason, of all of the books, was one of our, like, back in the day when you got caught on the toilet and you didn't have your phone in your pocket, it gave you something to, like, do.
Yeah.
And New Moon was in, like, our main bathroom that was, like, the one everybody used, like, in the center of the house for, like, a decade. Like, it just was sitting in there. And at one point I asked my mom, like, and why New Moon? And she's like, I don't know. She went to clear out all of our books and we had, like, 3 copies of it. Of New
Moon.
Because I was trying to get all of our books, like, together, and she's like, we don't have the first one, but I have 3 of the second one, and then the 3rd and the 4th one. And I was like, what? Bonding, like, like you said, like, reading the comments on TikTok specifically, like, really uncovered that for me too, of like, oh yeah, I did, like, talk to my mom about these a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us for this section of the video.
My stomach is falling down, so I was like, oh god.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us for this section of the video.
Of course. Anytime anyone needs me to talk about Twilight, I'm here.
Always. And hey, anytime we need a movie opinion, I'm gonna bring you in for sure.
Okay.
So shout out to Marissa. Check out her and Nathan's channel, The Review Crew. Like I said, I'll link it below. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed my little interview with Marissa. Thank you so much to Marissa for being on the channel. Again, I'll link them below. And thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Subscribe if you liked it. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye!